Hello everyone, I'd like to welcome you to this graphics design essentials training. My name is Ibrahim Steve and I'm a business and design expert with over 7 years experience. Now I'd like to establish something right here. In case you're worried and you're asking yourself, would this course be able to do what it is that you're looking for, which is to learn, acquire skills, acquire the knowledge to enable you to deploy? I'd like to say yes. As such, what I'd like to tell you is that this course is also broken down into very simple foundational things, into very simple forms, so that you can digest, you can understand, and then you can get to deploy on your newfound skills. With that said, let's move forward where I teach you about the foundations of graphic design and also equip you with the skills to enable you deploy on your newly acquired skills. So, with that said, I'd like to focus on the core as I begin this series, where I want to first of all talk about design as it is. You see, one way I like to teach is to actually take complex subjects and then break it down into simple parts and pieces so that you as my student, you as my audience can understand what it is that I'm trying to say. With that said, I'd like to focus on the subject of design first before we now add graphics to it, because I feel that's the way that you be able to understand what it is that I want to communicate to you, and as well as what I said, to also equip you with necessary skills for you to understand what graphics design is, and so that you be able to stand in any marketplace and then be able to deliver on your newfound skills. So we're going to be touching foundational things first of all, and then scale up to more technical things that will enable you actually know what it is you do, become relevant to your respective marketplaces or customers or target audience. With that said, let's look at what design is. So, starting with the concept of design, I like to say that design means to create with the intent to solve a problem. Now wait for a second. Let's talk about creating with the intent to solve a problem, and I want you to look around you for a second. Look at the fan, or maybe the heater, or maybe the refrigerator, and ask yourself a question. Does it solve a problem? I mean, the creator, was he creating it to actually solve a problem? Of course. So anytime you see design being added to it, the main idea or the main concept is that that thing that is created was with the intent to solve a problem. So like I said, your fan, what problem does it solve? It will solve ventilation problem, or unless your fan isn't working. But let's say you had a working fan, so we'll address that issue, or whatever fan you've seen before, or you've been on it before, and a very sunny day, very, very hot. The intent to which that fan was created was to solve a ventilation problem. How about your refrigerator? Its intent was to help in preserving the food item or your groceries from your grocery store. So you see, anytime design is being added, the main focus means that that thing that is going to be produced has in it the inherent, or has in it the constituent to solve a problem, or the reason why it is created is to solve a problem. Have I laid that foundation very well? Alright, let's make progress and let's move forward. Okay, so with that said, graphics and design being added to it actually means using graphic elements to solve a problem. Alright, now I'm going to still break it down to understand and disintegrate those graphic elements, which means using images, text, colors, symbols, textures, shapes, and forms to solve a problem. I'm really taking this thing down to the very foundation. So the graphic talks about the visual aspect. The design talks about what? The problem solving aspect. So with that said and done, visuals, design, and graphics to solve a problem, then what problem does it solve? Communication problem. You're right. And some of you are like, maybe that's not true, or you want to ask question. Relax. Maybe you might ask yourself, does it really solve communication problem? Well, just hang on. We're going to answer that. We're just establishing the ground rules and the foundational aspect of these things. Alright, so the question is communication a problem? Oh, we don't need graphics design. There's no problem in communication. I can talk. Someone could understand. Well, wait. not too fast. The world has been here for 1,000 years, and by the time we first had our first language differences, way back about 3,000, 6,000 years ago, that was when we first had the first communication problem. And ever since then, man has been looking for a way to effectively communicate his idea or thought. And I'm going to show you some instances where there could be a problem with effective communication. So let's take a look at some of these instances. The first instance has to do with teachers trying to communicate with students and maybe teaching you biology, maybe teaching you astrology or something. Yeah, sometimes you sit down in boring lectures and there is a gap there for teachers to effectively communicate to students, lawyers to effectively communicate to judges, irrespective of language differences, irrespective of language barrier. We want to get straight to the point. You're busy wasting my time, and guess what? The lawyers could lose, and judgment could be made to the verdict or to the convict for the wrong reasons. So how about politicians trying to communicate to citizens? Is there a gap there? Of course. Doctors to patients in trying to help them in recovery. These are all communication gaps. Communication exists right now in everything. You see manufacturers trying to communicate with end users. You see people, and I can tell you it's a lot. Okay, so as long as language is being used every day, we have a problem with communication. Hence, an effective way was being figured out as to aiding efficiency in communication, as to aiding ease of communication. So over the years, we realized that when you were actually in kindergarten, okay, maybe in your third grade, or maybe you would just started school, the way you understood things or the way your teachers communicated with you was to use visuals. And why did they use that? You see, after all this, we realized that images are a universal language. So take a look at this picture. Irrespective of language barriers, language differences, wherever you're coming from, social, economic, cultural backgrounds, you understand that this is a balloon. So if I were to write maybe in Chinese, for those of you who don't understand Mandarin, or me to write you in Arabic, it would be very hard for you to understand this image, or this picture. So with that said, it was figured out that images are one of the best ways to communicate effectively. So if you look at all those puzzles and you're trying to see how teachers trying to communicate with students, or maybe like politicians trying to communicate with citizens, of course that's why I have a lot of visuals in our present day, because it is one of the power that drives a society. If you own the language, you could talk a language that the consumer or your audience can understand, the more you can persuade them to be on your side. With that said, so what's graphics design? Graphic design is using images, text, colors, symbols, textures, shapes, form, all these things to communicate one's idea or thought. So the graphics aspect is to now enhance effective communication, which means it solves a problem. Hence, it is the simple art of communication. Over thousands of years, we now realize that graphics design was the best way ever until date. As long as man keeps talking, as long as we have language and social economic differences in terms of communication or values or whatever we want to say or whatever we want to sell, if you're in business, graphics design is very, very essential. As long as language exists, you cannot erase graphics design. Although it's part of art, but in terms that art has a more broader scope, when it has to do with passing on information, graphics has been one of the most efficient and effective way to do that. So with that said, let's look at the history of graphics design, how all these things evolved, so that you could understand what it is that I'm saying, and you could understand what it is that I'm trying to pass across, that this actually existed way before now, and people have realized his usefulness and how it has helped through generations past. So this will give you actually a solid foundation to where everything I actually told you, so that you could actually buy into what graphics design can do for you, even also for your customers. So graphics design dates back to ancient cavemen, where life just started. Civilization was barely a thing that we called it today. We never even had computers, we never even had anything. So but there was a very, very strong need for people to pass on information, to communicate danger, to communicate safety, to communicate invention, innovation, even to preserve culture. So, however these things were, they found out that irrespective of language differences, one of the most efficient way to communicate it's gonna be through pictures. So they couldn't talk. So when they found this tribe and they couldn't communicate with this tribe, all they had to do was to bend down to the ground and try as much as possible to draw. Well, today that's how archaeologists has been able to date back the history of mankind to about thousands of years and actually try to tell us the possible lifestyle or the possible occupation of a predominant culture within these ages. And this is possible to graphics. So it's been a very powerful tool from generations past, even up till today. So I want to tell you, you're about to wield one of the most powerful tools in the world, which is the ability for you to communicate. And guess what? People are gonna come looking for you. So it's evolved right from thousands of years ago into a more recent version, which we now date back to 1366, when we actually had new brands coming up using visuals to actually communicate their brand, what they do, and who they are. So they started using colors, they started using text, they started using symbols and illustrations and patterns to be able to communicate who they were to the target audience, as well as what they were capable of doing. And like I said, we're looking at communicating in a way that irrespective of language or cultural differences. Graphics design didn't just end there. Graphics design has still evolved into today, where graphics design has transitioned into a lot of media channels where communication is happening spontaneously on the go. With that said, I want to tell you that in today's world, graphics design is everywhere. And so, if you're asking a question as to, is this really valuable? I'm telling you, as long as humankind is talking, or as long as someone is saying something out there, someone actually wants to be able to get their message across with the least resistance as possible in the most effective way known to humankind. And that is through captivating and compelling visuals, which is graphics design. So, see you in the next model, where I break down and explain some of the other considerations as to the elements that are required to help you communicate effectively using visuals.